You're only a Christian because you were brought up that way.
Yep. I grew up in church, right?
Yeah.
Where they taught sex bad. What actually does go on in a church and how imperfect people are actually, you know? The truth is, this is the work of God. Because I
Right.
couldn't have done anything in my life without him.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Freedom Podcast. My name is Isabella Cameron, and this is my co-host of the day, Brandon Snipe.
What's up?
He actually is a YouTuber and has 2 channels right now.
Yeah, which is weird to say still.
That you're a
I've been full-time for about a year and a half, but before that, I mean, it's still just weird. It's just a weird thing to think about, to say that I'm a YouTuber, yeah.
Well, you're a YouTuber.
It's true. Yeah.
So I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Me too.
He and his wife, Vanessa, who I had on the last episode, are our church's young adults facilitators. So that's how we met. And I've known them for about a year.
Yeah, we've been at the church for like a year and a couple months, yeah.
Okay. And so I have an icebreaker question for you to start.
Yep.
Okay, ready? Who is your favorite disciple and why?
This is a very charged question because of the content that I make as well. In scripture, I mean, definitely Peter. Definitely
Really?
Peter, because I think the way in which he just presents himself is so human. And I think that we get most out of any other apostle. I think that we get an understanding of him the best. And so, yeah, definitely Peter. Yeah.
Is there like a specific thing you really relate to Peter on?
I think definitely just his humanity in the terms of like, so he'll go from 0 to 100 real quick, right? And he'll kind of be this person that's like super chill and like he gets it most out of anybody else. For example, there's this moment at Caesarea Philippi with Jesus where he's like, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of God, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, dude, great job, amazing. And then later on, he's like, Satan, get behind me, you idiot. Like, like Peter just totally doesn't get it. And then he cuts some guy's ear off, right?
Right.
Denies him 3 times. So there's these moments of these super high highs and these super low lows, which I feel like I have in my life too, you know? So
That's so interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I do love Peter.
What about you?
I don't know. Actually, I think Philip.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, because of I really like how he wants to like know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there was that one moment in The Chosen where it was like with the wine baskets, and he was like, "It's not gonna work. Like we don't have enough. We can't make enough."
Oh, you mean the feeding the 5,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the wedding.
Okay.
And Jesus
Are you thinking
turns water
about
into wine.
Thomas in The Chosen?
Maybe?
Yeah. You're thinking about
Thomas?
Thomas. Philip isn't there yet in season 1.
Okay, so Thomas. And so
Yeah.
I just remember this one moment hit me so hard because Jesus was like, "You're right. Like it wouldn't work,
Yeah.
but if you follow me, I'll show you a better way."
Right.
And I was like, I do love that. Because sometimes I just want to have it all together. And then
Yeah.
God is like, yeah, but if you just wait a second,
Yeah.
I'll show you.
100%.
So yeah, I really loved that one moment. I think that was the first time I watched The Chosen and had to like stop and like cry for like 30 minutes. I was like, I need a second.
Yeah.
So now I know like before I watch an episode, I have to like also prepare probably an hour afterwards to like
Right.
feel things.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably watched The Chosen more than any other human on the planet, or pretty close.
Right.
There's some crazy people that watch it like literally every day, but yeah, I definitely understand that feeling for sure. I'm not a huge crier, so I don't like. There's only been one episode of The Chosen that I've cried at, which I'm sure we'll get into in my story. But yeah, I'm not a huge crier, but yeah, a bunch of people are for sure.
Yeah. So the whole theme when I was thinking about what I want to talk to you about, because I think there's a lot of interesting things in different ways I could go with what I want to ask you about. But the biggest thing I was thinking about when I was writing out like what I want to talk about is the fact that you've been a Christian your whole life.
Yeah,
And I feel like that is skimmed over a lot of times in testimony stories.
for sure.
And I was just thinking about it, and there's a ton of misconceptions about people that have been Christians their whole life.
Yeah.
So I wrote some down, and I wanted to talk about them.
Yeah, we're a rare breed.
Yes, there's not many. So the first one is that you're only a Christian because you were brought up that way.
Yep.
And so I would love to talk about that.
Yeah, I got extremely lucky with the family that I was brought up in. That's true. I wouldn't deny that for a second. But the truth is that I also grew up and started having understanding of my own. And
Yeah.
so at a very young age for me, I went from having my family's faith to having my own faith, and started going to church apart from my family. Even though they were still going to church, I went to my own church, started having my own friends in the faith, started having my own understanding in the faith. And from that, it's brought me to where I am today, where my faith has never been something that has relied on me clinging to someone else. It's never been my mom's faith that I happen to carry. It's always been my own. And understanding the realities of the history of the world, understanding the realities of scripture has been huge for me. Absolutely. Yeah.
What are some of the like biggest changes you've noticed from when you were like a kid growing up in church to now, as far as your like relationship with the church and God goes?
Yeah, having answers, I think, is a huge thing, because I think, and I'm sure you'll resonate with this.
Yeah.
When you grow up in church, oftentimes you have all these questions to certain things, and a lot of it's kind of ignored. You're kind of like, I'll probably get there eventually. I'll understand it eventually. I just trust these people, and because of that, I'm going to lean into that. Growing up, especially now, especially within the last 5 years, let's say, of my life, I just turned 31. And so in my late 20s to now, I've done so much growth of really, truly understanding what is going on in the world. And so for me, that's been the biggest change from me being a follower of a religion to a follower of Christ, and understanding who Christ is. I think it's been massive for my faith and for my life and for my marriage and for my friendships and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How old were you when you feel like that shift started happening?
Yeah, probably pretty young when it started happening, but I'd say the majority of it happened in the last several years, maybe 5 to 7 years, let's say. Even when I was a pastor, even when I first became a pastor, when I was 19, I didn't have a full grasp of everything. I still don't, right? I'm still learning every day, but I had way less of a grasp. And so probably when I was in middle school, I remember in middle school having this vision of wanting to have a Christian drama school, right? Or like having these different ministries that God always put in my place. And so from a very young age, I asked myself the question, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go? What am I going to be? How am I going to act? And all of it came down to, I will serve God in some capacity for the rest of my life. Yeah. And so for me, when I was a kid, that meant ministry, traditional ministry. I was going to be a preacher. I was going to be a pastor. I was going to be what eventually became a worship leader. And that was my desire, right? That's what I wanted to do forever. And I could see myself doing nothing else. And so for me, I knew from a very young age, like, hey, that's what I want to be doing. And so from there, I've just been learning ever since, which is why I think, when you hear a testimony like this, right?
Yeah.
Like you hear the word testimony and you're like, oh, that guy's definitely addicted to drugs and everything. And then he came out of it and now he's better, right?
Right.
But for me, it was a gradual progression since I was 5. I prayed with my grandma when I was 5. And since then I've been a follower of Christ and legitimately took it very seriously. Like, I remember sitting down at my desk and being like, oh, there's another book on top of my Bible. That's an issue. Let me put my Bible on top. That's the kind of mentality that I had, and of course I've matured and understand things more since then. But it's definitely been a long journey. Yeah.
So you became a worship pastor when you were 19 until when?
29. Yeah. So 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was it hard being in a leadership position at 19?
Yeah, because I'll give you kind of the story. So if you watched Vanessa's podcast, which was the previous one, she kind of explained a story of how we met, right? And she met Ed, who was our pastor. And you heard the dog crate story where she got the dog crate. That was Ed, who was the pastor of the church where she was at when she first became a Christian, really. And so basically, I left my home church to go to another church, which didn't last very long because there's a lot of issues. In my very first ministry position when I was like 18 and a half, 19 and a quarter or something like that. And so I went there for about 3 to 6 months at this other church it was a Methodist church that was like dying. It was really, really a weird situation. But a friend had asked me to take his position. And so that was my first ministry position. And I was like, okay, this is it. I'm in ministry. So I left that church and went to Vanessa's church, which is when we started dating and everything. Vanessa was actually leading worship there. And so it was really interesting because she was like, basically they would use YouTube videos, and then they would sing along with the YouTube videos. And so when I got there, the team was really an interesting team. It was all older people, so like 50s and 60s, like bass player, piano player, and then a cajon player, and that was it, right? And I'm playing acoustic, I'm singing, I'm leading worship. And so with that comes a lot of different tendencies that you don't normally have in a worship team, right? So I was 19, just getting into that, just learning the ropes. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to really speak from stage or to do different things, and especially in this context, right? Because I'm coming from a medium-sized church, like, you know, we ranged anywhere from like 300 to 500-ish average over the years that I was there. And so I'm coming now to this Southern Baptist church that's like 100 members. It's like, you know, a totally different environment overall. And so I'm learning things like, for example, you know, normally when I led worship, when I was guest leading or when I was just on the team, you would normally like introduce yourself at my home church, right?
Yeah.
And so you'd introduce yourself and you would say like, hey, I'm worship leader here. You know, how are you guys doing? Like almost like welcoming, because it was more of a newcomer friendly, you know, church where we expected new people to be there all the time. But at this other church that we went to is called Central, or it was called, Connect. Sorry, I'm mixing up our church. It's called Connect, and so Connect is a very small church. Obviously, there's not very many new people that are coming all the time, and so it was a weird thing where like the lead pastor was like, "Hey, you're introducing yourself every week. This is like weird." You know, it's like not a normal thing. Everybody knows you're here. And so like, there's certain things that I learned in that environment that, you know, I was changing a lot in those first 2 years that I was there. We had just gotten married. Like there's a lot of different things that happened within those first 2 years. And so after those 2 years, I got invited back to my home church, and that's where I grew up. And they were like, hey, we were looking for a new worship pastor. Would you be interested? Is this something that you could pray about? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, let's do it, you know, like, because I obviously love a bunch of people there. I have a really close relationships with a lot of people there. And so for me, it made perfect sense, you know, to go back there. So I spent 8 years there until I was 29. Then we transitioned into where we are now with YouTube and stuff. So, yeah, it was a big change there too, because basically I had the choice of, okay, do we find another ministry position, right? Or do we jump into something brand new with this whole YouTube thing, which we had been doing since 2020. So we had around 2 years of experience doing YouTube, a little bit less than 2 years. And it was a part-time thing for us for sure.
Yeah.
And we basically made a video a week or more if we could. And we would do different live streams and stuff. But for us, it was making around $1,000 if we were lucky a month, right? Some months were better than that. Some months were worse than that. Some months we were making $200, right? So it just depends. But for us at that time, it was like we had a pretty big choice of what do we do? Do I jump into this new thing, or do I try to get a new ministry position somewhere else and try to grow that, right? And so for me, it was a pretty easy choice for God to be like, hey, this is what you're going to do. The hardest part was leaving everybody behind, right?
Yeah.
So that was definitely the hardest part, was leaving our best friends, leaving our family, leaving, you know, everything that we had in Florida. So, yeah.
Yeah. That is a really hard transition.
Yeah.
And a scary one when you're like jumping from a part-time to a full-time thing that you're not sure if it's going to work.
Yeah. And luckily it did, but luckily it did. But I mean, I worked real hard. So you're making you're making a video every other week, right?
Right.
Last year, can you guess how many videos I made last year? In 2023?
70.
No, higher.
Really?
Yeah.
Like close to 100?
Over double that, actually.
What?
Actually, over triple. Actually, over quadruple. I made 300 videos last year. So
that's so many.
And that's all long form videos, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, and I did that through some tactics that I use, like live streaming and different things like that too.
But still, that's
300
a lot
videos
of time.
in a year is a lot of videos. And so that was my first full-time year, right?
Yeah.
Was doing that. And so from September to September, and then all of last year, it was so much work, but it really paid off for us. You know, we went from around 11,000 subscribers, in September of 2022 to now we've got over 40,000, right? And so for us on that main channel, it's been a huge thing for us to grow and to create community and to really become, you know, what we are right now. So,
and it's still like a ministry, like
Oh,
you're
yeah.
talking about God.
100%. Yeah.
What are like some of the biggest differences you've noticed since doing like worship pastor ministry to this type of ministry?
Yeah. I think about this a lot because
It has to overlap a little bit.
there's some really huge pros and some
Yeah.
really big cons, right? The pros are I can ban the congregation, right? So in worship ministry, I was a worship pastor for 10 years, right? So
Yeah.
for me, in all of those 10 years, I would rarely go a week without someone talking behind my back. Okay. Someone that doesn't like a song that I did, someone that doesn't like that I talk about this, someone that doesn't like my opinion about this, right? Someone that doesn't like that I promoted this person to do this job, right? Someone that doesn't like that I had this girl sing instead of this girl sing, right? So whether it's the congregation complaining or my team complaining, which happened all the time, even though I was close to them, even people that I've known for my entire life that are on that team, right? They would talk about me behind my back, and then other people would come and talk to me about it, right?
Right.
This is the most annoying part of ministry. Period is the people, right?
Yeah.
And so the difference between this ministry is that if someone really messes with me online, I will just ban them because I'm not going to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
If they're attacking people in my comments or they're attacking my family or my wife or me, right? They will just not be allowed to be in this space. And I'm totally fine with that, right?
Yeah.
So that's a pro, but it's also a con in the sense that you can't form as, like, I'm never going to be as close to my YouTube subscribers as I am to you or to people that we're in real life with, right?
Right.
At least for the most part. There's some of them that I have met in person and it's amazing and we get to cultivate relationships and we can talk and even become friends, right? Some of them, but the majority of them, obviously, I'm not going to meet 40,000 people and, and be friends with all those people. So, and the hundreds of thousands or millions that have actually watched our videos and not subscribed, right? And so it's a totally different field, but there are definitely similarities in a lot of ways too, in that you have to be on point with what you're doing. Because if I speak something wrong from the stage, let's say, I talk about a specific Bible verse and I say that it's the wrong one, or I talk about a specific setting and it's off a little bit, or I'm mixing something up and I'm thinking it exists, but it actually doesn't, right?
Yeah.
There's the same consequences there of me being a false teacher, me being someone who is wrong in those situations, which is why I've grown so much in the last 4 or 5 years doing YouTube and being a teacher and being a pastor, because I really had to be very intentional with what I'm talking about, how I'm talking about it, and making sure that I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah.
Which I still make mistakes. And if you're watching this from my channel, you know that I make mistakes, right? And then I get to make more content about how I made a mistake, right? So so we kind of use that to our advantage. But I'd say that's some of the differences there for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because the role is really similar because you're leading people, but it's really different when it's leading people in like intimate relationships versus teaching people that you don't have a relationship with. Yeah.
It has to be way more broad, right?
Yeah.
Like if I was giving you advice, for example, like today we're going to talk about YouTube because we're in a YouTube video, right? I'm going to give you very specific advice, practical advice that I think will help you, right? But in a YouTube video, I can't really do that unless I know it's for a very specific person, which is pretty rare. So most of my videos are pretty general, right? Giving general ideas or facts or understanding about something. And so I'm never going to tackle like a very specific problem unless I was to do like a call-in show or something like that, right?
Right. So, yeah. I kind of want to go back to what you said where you were like, when people hear testimonies, they're like, oh, he probably had some crazy testimony.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've kind of grown up with the impression, and like the way people post testimonies too, is like it's not an impactful testimony unless you had like this crazy transformation where you were like addicted to a bunch of stuff and now you're not. But I don't believe that to be true. Like I think there's just as much impact and value in the person that grew up in the church and stayed dedicated to God.
Maybe more so.
Right. Because I kind of wanted to talk about what Vanessa said last time, where she was able to speak from a perspective of like, I told God I wanted to have fun first. And then she was able to be like, I wish I hadn't. Yeah. But I was curious what you had to speak on because you actually didn't. Right.
Yeah. To give perspective. So like I said, I became a Christian really when I was born. I've always been in church. The first school that I went to as an elementary school was a Christian private school. Like, that's kind of where I grew up. And then, pretty quickly I understood what was going on and I really wanted to be a part of it. And so I prayed with my grandma when I was 5 to receive, Jesus. And I come from a weird background of a lot of different denominations and different things. But for me, it was really important to understand it for my own. And it's interesting because it's often so true that you go to like a Christian conference and someone's like, okay, I'm going to talk about my testimony. And you don't expect them to say like, I've been a Christian my whole life and it's been pretty hard, but I read my Bible and I pray and I've just grown since I was a kid. End of testimony, and truthfully, that's kind of been my life. I've always been the rule follower, goody two shoes. Like every one of my friends always makes fun of me because that's just how I am. Right. Like I've probably said less than 10 cuss words in my life.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not to boast or to be like, oh, look at me.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen for me because I didn't grow up in that. And even when my parents would cuss, I would walk away because it offended me so much. Right. And so for me, like I took not having a foul mouth very seriously, sometimes too much seriously, right? Too seriously. And so for me, it's just how I lived life. And then I came to a point of understanding.
Yeah.
So for me, it was okay, this is what my parents taught me. This is what I've been told. And then I came to an understanding of why I was told those things. And some people will go one of two ways that we're seeing nowadays, right? Which is either you deconstruct or you have a really strong foundation that will never be broken, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the differences there that we're seeing.
Right. It kind of bleeds into one of the other misconceptions I was thinking about is that I've actually been told this by like real adults, like 40s, 50-year-old women, that I should experience the world first before dedicating my life to Christ or getting married.
Yeah,
is the other one I've heard.
I think it's such trash advice. Like
terrible.
It's so bad. It's so bad. Like, because there are consequences to these things, right? And I'm not just talking about maybe you get an STD or you get pregnant or you have an addiction to drugs. Like, there are consequences beyond, not only in the physical, but also in the spiritual.
Yeah.
And it's like, when you do these things, there will be consequences. And it doesn't mean that I've had a perfect life either, right?
No, yeah.
I've struggled with lust. I've struggled with all these things. And these things don't just go away, right? I deal with temptation now. Like, it's not something that just is like in the distant past, right? Like, I still struggle with these human things because I am human, right? But because I haven't fallen into all those other things, I have way different consequences or way less consequences when it comes to those specific things. This is one of the things that me and Vanessa had to deal with when we got married, right? I was a virgin until I got married.
Right.
And so for me, entering into a relationship where that wasn't the case for her really was a hard thing for me.
Yeah.
Not only for me to accept her and understand her for where she's coming from, but also just to be okay with the whole like sex thing in general.
Right.
So like for me, I grew up in church, right?
Yeah.
Where they taught sex bad.
Right. Don't talk about it.
Sex bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Period. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, they would kind of tack on at the end, like, except for in marriage.
Right.
But for me, sex bad because I was so hardwired not to cuss, not to drink, not to do drugs, not to fornicate. Right. Like, all of these things were so important to me. I broke up with girls because of it. Right. I broke off relationships because of it. And it became so important to me that when I did get married, it still affected me.
Yeah.
So like for a year after we got married, I would still feel the same guilt as if I was like looking at porn or doing something else in my marriage. Right. Which is like, it blows my mind to think about that. But I've heard so many stories online of people that have the exact same thing, mostly women.
Yeah.
But especially people who grew up in the church and had that understanding.
Right.
Because we don't teach it correctly. In a lot of ways.
I wish it was taught more so as like a beautiful thing that you should save yourself for to honor yourself.
Yeah.
And because it should be special and not just bad.
Right.
Yeah. Don't talk about it. Don't think about it. Bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it is hard. And yeah, I don't think like, not that I've led a perfect life either, but I don't think that I've missed out because I haven't done drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And like, also, I don't fault people that have. Like, there's been a lot of beautiful testimonies of people that did stumble into that and then came out.
God can make anything beautiful.
Yeah, graves into gardens.
Yeah.
But I don't look back at my life and wish that I had made more mistakes.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know the consequences of what it would bring now, right?
Yeah.
Like
It's not
how
just-
easy would it be for me to fall back into a life of drugs if I had been addicted at one point,
Yeah.
right? How much easier would it be for me to do, all a menagerie of things, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much that I did not need to experience. I don't want to experience, and it just comes from a perversion of what life is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Drugs and the use of them, right? God put medicinal things. He put things on this planet in order to help us, in order to heal us, right? Let's take wine, for example, right? Wine in and of itself is not a sin, right?
Right.
Jesus drank wine.
Yes.
And yet it can go way further than it's supposed to, right? Which the Bible is super clear about too. So, yeah, I don't know. I just think that everything that's in that realm is a perversion of what God wants it to be. And because of that, it hurts our soul,
Yeah. Like the wine thing, the whole thing in the Old Testament or not the Old Testament, the New Testament, with the Pharisees, where they were like, well, yeah, we have all of these rules, but just so that we don't even get close to breaking them, we'll add on 5 more rules.
Yeah.
Like, the Christians that don't drink because they think it's a Bible thing, not because it's a personal choice.
Yeah.
But I think that can go with like teaching in the church, like about sex. Like, yeah, you shouldn't get anywhere close to it, so we're going to teach you that it's shameful and next to murder.
Yeah.
When in reality, it isn't. It was created by God, and it should be in marriage, and good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of things like that where I wish that things had been taught differently. But, you can teach your own kids one day.
Yeah, I think some of the biggest things the church gets wrong nowadays are sex, money, and really, truly, honestly, understanding what the scriptures actually say.
Yeah.
I think is a huge thing too, because they want to. A lot of churches nowadays. We were talking about this in the car earlier, but like even pastors who will teach these topical messages in order to stay relevant or to talk about specific things, which sometimes can be good, oftentimes turns into how can I make the most impactful message for my YouTube channel or for my Instagram reel or for my TikTok or for, how can I have these one-liners that really inspire people to clap and be excited about what I'm talking about instead of really impacting them and what's actually going on there. But yeah. We'll leave it there for now. I could go on a long rant. I don't have a lot of like church hurt or like things that the church does wrong, but there are definitely pieces that I see nowadays of people being hurt, for sure, and from being behind the scenes for so long too, of seeing what actually does go on in a church and how imperfect people are actually, like,
right, which is gonna happen because people are people.
Yeah.
Kind of with like, I wish churches taught more of what the scripture's actually saying. Like, I love the way our church does it with the verse by verse.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that I was thinking about when I was like writing out all of my questions was that I think people often have an assumption that testimonies are this big emotional change. And then they're like, it'll go away in a little bit. You just like, you say you experienced God, but it was really just like an emotional thing. Where I know from talking to you that like your belief is yes, an experience for sure, but also anchored in the fact that like you can prove it. But I think you're one of the first people that I've ever talked to where you were like, I believe it because it's true and I've researched it.
Yeah.
Were you always like that, or was it an emotional experience at first?
I'm not a super emotional person. So yes, I'm a creative. Yes, I'm a music guy, but I'm not a musician. I would say that I'm a worshiper, right?
Right.
So like for me, I really don't have a lot of love for like going to a studio and like yes, I've written my own music. Yes, I've done this stuff, but it's not for the purpose of me writing my music. It's for the purpose of worshiping God.
Yeah.
And so same thing when I was a worship leader, that's my mentality and everything. And so while I'm a creative, while I love doing that side of things, I'm not a very emotional person in that.
Yeah.
And so I never was the person that like got a super big head and was like, look at me, I'm the worship leader, right? Which is normally in 99% of worship leaders, their biggest problem. Their pride and how they see themselves. I've seen it a million times and it's the most annoying thing in the universe. But for me, that wasn't necessarily the issue. And for me, I'm way more of like a logical thinker, like step by step. Okay, here's example A. Why does example A exist?
Yeah.
So I'll give a good example. So for example, like my love for Israel comes from the fact that there are these places that can prove without a doubt that this is what happened in the Bible. So the Bible will be like, okay, on this day at this place in between these two mountain ranges during this type of weather, this thing happened, right?
Yeah.
And then we can go there and we can see, oh, there's the two mountain ranges. That type of weather does happen quite often here. And yeah, this place does exist. Not only does it exist, but there's actually evidence that that battle did happen here because there's axes and swords and spears and bows and chariots that are in this place, right?
Right.
And to know that those things exist in the world is so important to my faith, right?
Yeah.
The Bible never tells us, like, just go forth because I tell you so. It says, because these things happened, believe.
Right.
Right. And so for me, I want to see the because these things happen things, right?
Right.
It's super important to me because otherwise I could fall for anything. You could tell me that this glass is God, right? And if I have enough faith, I could believe that.
Yeah.
But I know because there's no evidence or history or anything else that that's not true.
Right. Does that motivation of like wanting to see the because these things come from the like seasons in every Christian walk where you like feel really close to God and then there's other times where you're like, why don't I feel close to God? Like, is that where that came from?
Yeah, there's a couple different, like, if you talk to me long enough, I have a couple different theories or like principles that are really key in my life. One of them, I'm pretty sure we've talked about before, is called my bag, which is like, my bag is like, I have all of these opinions about things, but if it's in my bag, it's things that I will never argue about, right? So, for example, speaking in tongues is one of those things.
Interesting.
I have an opinion on speaking in tongues, but I will never argue with you about it to the point of you being mad at me, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you my opinion, sure. I'll tell you why I believe what I believe, but I'm never going to argue about it because it's not a salvation issue, right? Another principle that I kind of go by is, wow, it just left my head. Like, it just disappeared completely.
Don't.
Yes, anchors. Okay,
okay.
Yes, okay. So one of them is my bag, where I'll have opinions or I'll have thoughts about something, and but I won't argue about them. Those are things that are in my bag. But the other thing that is really key in my marriage and in my faith are anchors. Okay, so these are times that I know that I experienced God, and that I keep those on hand at all times. Or in my marriage, it's times that I know that Vanessa loves me, and she's proven that to me, right? Or things that bring me back to that experience of love. Because I'm not an emotional person and I don't want to rely on that emotion of love, I want to have these anchors in order to remember that my marriage is centered on God and on these things, right? I have evidences that show that Vanessa loves me, so she loves me, right?
Yeah.
I have evidences to show that God exists and he is real and he has interacted with my life because of these things. One of the earliest ones that I have is from when I was in middle school. We went to this conference called Acquire the Fire. Okay. This is like a semi-charismatic conference. It's like, all the youth groups would go, and it was like this huge thing. This is when I encountered God really for the first time, and it really sparked my understanding of you need to be in ministry. There's all these other things that kind of happen there, right? And so that moment that I have of being in worship and having these experiences and understanding what God wants me to do, that is a huge key to my early on Christian life, right? One of the most recent ones is how we've done with this YouTube journey and the doors that he's opened through that, right? So for me, this is an anchor that I will always keep in my mind, that I will always have to remember God loves me. He wants me to do these things. And if I do the things that he wants me to do, then I will go forward in those things, right? And he's proven himself to me in that over and over and over again. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, anchors are huge. And I would say anybody that's married, this is a key to being married, because there are going to be times when you just want to destroy your spouse and you're just like, I'm so done, but if you can remember those anchors and remember who that person actually is, right? Instead of the mad person or the stupid person that they are in that moment, then that's going to help you a ton, I think.
Yeah. I think one of the things that like I've learned and been taught through marriage is I kind of realized that I will often go through seasons where I shut off, usually when I overwork myself. Then I'll be like, oh, that's crazy. I don't feel anything. And I usually just get like really numb until I overwork myself and like rest. But it's usually, I know it's happened my whole life, because I'll be like, man, I don't feel close to God. And it's usually a me problem because I did too much and then can't feel. But being married, I realized that it wasn't just limited to God. It was like how I felt towards Caden. And it wasn't that like he was doing anything different. I was like, man, that sucks that I literally don't feel anything. But I knew in my head that I loved Caden. And love is not just a feeling. Like, it's obviously a choice.
Yep.
And so in those seasons where I learned, like, just because I don't feel anything doesn't mean I get to stop choosing to love the person that I chose to devote my life to. And in the same way, it's shown me that, like, I still need to love God by obeying him when I feel like that, but that God doesn't ever get like that because he's perfect. Like, he doesn't ever go through seasons where he's like, don't love you right now.
Right.
Like,
right.
yeah, kind of like, it's fine.
Yeah.
But that he's always constant, even when I'm not.
100%.
So just because I don't feel it right now doesn't mean that he's farther away or
Right.
doesn't care in that season. So yeah, that's kind of what I've learned as far as like the fighting and then my own problems.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anchors are huge, and then forgiveness is huge. I think Vanessa talked about it in her podcast
Right.
too, but I talk about this all the time because if you can forgive each other, like nothing that you do, honestly, like 99% of the things that you do is going to matter in 5 years. Right. So why are you so fixated on it right now? You know, just let it go. Like, you guys are gonna mess up. You guys are gonna like have issues with each other all the time. Like, but if you can be forgivers, if you can both be good forgivers, like, it changes your marriage completely. And we've seen that in our marriage for sure, because I've always been a really good forgiver, and Vanessa has really always struggled with it because she's had family members and different things that have always kept grudges, and it's been something for her that like she's really had to work through. And I obviously have different things I have to work through. Yeah. And so for her, like, she's gotten so good. Like, I'm so proud of her over the last like year and a half, because we moved here and we didn't have the safety nets anymore. Right? We didn't have best friends to go run to and be like, oh, this happened. Like, so, like, this sucks, you know? Like, we didn't have that anymore, which has happened, you know, dozens and dozens of times in our marriage, where we go and we seek help. We didn't have that. We didn't have safety nets. So it's just me and Vanessa in Tennessee. And so we've had to grow, you know, as a married couple. And so she's gotten so good at not staying mad or getting to the point where things that used to result in a massive fight that would last days now are non-issue for the most part. And so, yeah, it's been really cool to see her grow in that for sure.
I feel like it's almost similar to what you were saying about the stuff you keep in your bag. Like, if it's not a salvation issue, why are we arguing to the point of tears? Yeah. Like, if you're married and you're both devoted to God, and then secondly to each other, why make each other cry over stuff that's not part of that? Yeah. Like, I feel like the things that are worth not ever being mean, but big discussions are how can we follow God best and, like, love each other better, not... Can you please put the dishes away? Like, that doesn't need to be a tear-worthy argument. But obviously that's easier to say when there's, and just be like, just don't argue about that. But there's always baggage that you bring into marriages. There's the way your family treated you and you're used to being treated. So that's like obviously something that takes time and energy and the choice of love.
Yeah, I mean, because for me too, like, I come from a family where we like bottled everything up, right? Yeah. So like for me, it was like, yeah, there would be points when you explode, but it's only after a long period of time, right? Like a long period of time of like, hey, do the dishes, do this thing, blah, blah, blah. And then my mom would eventually explode on my stepdad and be like, you know, like we'd have this all out brawl, you know? In Vanessa's family, anything small happens, you're getting yelled at. Like, it's immediate, you know, like she's Hispanic. It's like, that's her world, you know? I'm half black, half white, but I grew up in a white family. So like for me and my mom's, you know, my whole family's from New England. And so it's very much like, just shove it down. Like we'll deal with it later sort of thing. And especially because we were in survival mode most of my life. Like we were pretty poor. And like at one point my parents declared bankruptcy and a lot of different stuff like that. So it was a very different life that we lived, you know? So Vanessa really understood conflict a lot differently than I did, because yelling meant that there was a really big issue, like a massive issue. And for her, it was like, you yell at everything, like even when you love that person, you know, like you just yell at them. So it's very different.
Was that hard for you when you transitioned to full-time YouTube? Was it hard for you to not take on all of the stress yourself, or was it easy for you to let Vanessa kind of share that?
For what
stress?
Do you mean?
Like financially, being like,
no, she's always made more money than me. Yeah,
because so that had to have been hard coming from your background, and then being like, well, we'll see what happens.
Well, she's always made more money. So from the very beginning. So when we first met, I was in college. So I was doing college full time for the first 2 years of our marriage. So 3 years that we knew each other. And then the first like year that I was in ministry, I was making $500 a month.
Wow.
So $6,000 a year.
Yeah.
For the first 2 years, actually.
Well, you were
For
married?
the first year, I was making $3,000 a year. So I was making like $250 a month for like the first year. And then I made 6,000. And then when I moved back to my home church, they only paid me $1,000 a month. So I was still in school at that point. I was finishing my last like year of school, a year or two of school, when I went back to my home church. But yeah, man, like I was not making much money. So she's always been in IT, which has always been pretty lucrative, not like crazy money, but enough for us to survive.
Right.
And then we've also gotten like really unique deals when it came to housing or different things that have always helped us out, either friends or we've just found a good deal or whatever. So we've always made it through. But for me, it was never an issue. And for her either, because like it's not like we have separate bank accounts. It's not like we're, like it's our money. It's not her money and my money. So it's always been fine. I've never felt that like machismo, like I need to provide, and if I don't provide, then it's going to be an issue. Now I make way more money than her, not way more, but generally I make a lot more than her now, and that's totally fine. Like either way, it's been good because it's our money. I don't think we've ever really had an issue with like she's never been like you need to make more money because you're the husband, and I've never been like okay, like I don't know. It's just never been an issue for us. So
well, it's easier when you are doing what God has asked you to do. Yeah, it just makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah, which is our motto for everything. Like if God didn't ask us to move to Tennessee, we wouldn't have moved to Tennessee. But because he put that desire in her heart for a long time before this, like we've been talking about Tennessee for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, maybe more.
Oh, wow.
And so for her, it was a desire that she had in her heart to move here because of weather and location and everything else. But then God provided a way out of nowhere. Like the job that she got, she had applied for like 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh,
and then
wow.
randomly they pulled her up again and were like, hey, do you want to work with us? Here's 3 positions we think you might be good for. And it's like,
that's crazy.
What? Like, that's what? Like, what's happening? And so we were like, okay, let's just check this door, check if it's open,
Yeah.
And so she went through the process and we didn't make a decision until she had been offered the job,
Wow.
Which included a trip up here and everything else. And that was hard though. I was like talking to my pastors and like I was crying, like I'm like I don't know what to do, and there's blah, blah, blah. It was really hard, but yeah.
Are you the type of person that is easily stressed out about money?
No.
Really?
No, not at all. Because I grew up in a family who, 1, was Christian, and 2, struggled with money a lot. My family has never had money, and so $10 and $20 was like a lot of money for us. Like going to McDonald's or going out to eat was like a huge deal, like growing up. When I was in high school, my parents declared bankruptcy and we like lost everything. We lost the house, we lost everything. So we had to go like find a place to rent and all this other stuff. Because my dad lost his job at Southeastern University. And there's a lot of things that made us in that spot. Yeah, I've never really worried about it because I just saw that my mom, like, even at times when we didn't have food, right? And we have no money. Like, I know that we have no money. Like, not even enough to go grocery shopping, not even enough to do anything. And randomly a check would arrive in the mail, or randomly someone would take care of us, or randomly these different things would happen, right? Or my mom would dig in her heels and she would figure something out, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I've always known that God will provide, or he'll push me to do something in order to provide. Right.
Yeah.
So one of those 2 things will happen. And for us, it wasn't a huge issue. The first couple months when I went into full-time YouTube was hard.
Sure.
But once we found our footing and really started understanding like what was going to be happening, what I wanted to talk about, etc., like we got into a rhythm and we were able to at least, understand where these things were coming from. And again, Patreon was a huge part of that too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like there were any misconceptions about a testimony where you've always grown up in church that we didn't talk about yet?
No, I think you got it. I think the biggest thing in that is that people will value a testimony that's had a harder life or whatever more than someone who hasn't. But I think it's just completely the opposite way around. And there's no way to say that without sounding, can I say douchey? There's no way to say that without sounding arrogant or like prideful.
Yeah.
You know, because I've lived that life, and it's not that my life has been perfect, but I haven't gone off and done all these crazy things. Why? Because I value my faith and my understanding a little bit better. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's just no world in which people will ever value a testimony like mine more. It's just not going to happen, because the other testimonies have movies made about them, and the other testimonies have, you know, these big moments at conferences when people can say, this is the work of God, right? But the truth is, this is the work of God, because I couldn't have done anything in my life without him, right?
Yeah.
And so me having that testimony is super powerful, but I don't know if the world will ever recognize that, you know?
Yeah. I feel like, too, there's a lot of people that live quote unquote good lives and decide that because they can live a good life on their own, they don't need God.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And that's just not true. Because like, what's that quote unquote good gonna get you? You know? Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, nothing, right?
Right.
Yeah. None of us is good, right? If any of us thinks that we're good, that's your problem.
Right.
You know? But yeah.
Yeah, the only good that we can experience is God, because God is good. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
That's kind of like all I wanted to talk about, honestly. I think we covered pretty much all of it.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot to where I'm at right now. But yeah, YouTube is crazy. Get ready for your ride for sure. There's definitely a lot that comes with, you know, I was joking earlier about me being God's strongest warrior, but when you're in a position of authority, the Spider-Man quote is very true. With great responsibility, you know, like with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's so true when it comes to a position that you're going into, which is you're wanting to be a commentator on life for people, or interview people, or talk to people in this realm. And in doing so, you want to reach people for Christ. You want to be talking about what's going on and have a community where people are interested in that. And in that is a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
In that is a lot of hardship that could come. And so I would say be ready for that, prepare, and just be growing every single time. You know, every video you make, get 1% better, and you'll get there. So
I've honestly really loved talking to so many people. It's an interesting format doing this too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people that I've interviewed, I've had previous friendships with and relationships with that I've been able to ask questions. But something about doing this, I feel like people open up more, which is really cool. And it's just been really awesome to see so many different stories. I also feel like I've, in the past, would have taken relationships for granted, like my parents. So I'm like, yeah, they're just my parents. They've always loved God. It is what it is. But being able to sit down and kind of put together a compilation of all of their wisdom, or a lot, not all, but a lot of the things that they've just taught me that I took for granted is so cool. It helps me appreciate people in like a new light. Yeah. So it's been awesome.
Cool. Where do you expect, what is your goal for this year, for this channel?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, honestly. I mean, quality-wise, I would always like to be better, but I have been hesitant to put any type of numerical goal on it, because my focus is so much that I just want it to glorify God, that I am cautious to make any type of numerical goal, because I don't ever want that to be the focus, because I am that person.
Interesting.
Like I've literally, in my hair business, I have a notebook from my first year of doing hair with every single number of everything I've made, and like I want to be better.
Yeah. And that's good. I think part of that is you being a good steward. Yeah.
Like I love doing the numbers, but I haven't done that with this because I just want to be super careful.
I gotcha.
Yeah. I don't want to get my grubby little human hands on it, you know?
Yeah. Think about it this way, though. Just a thought.
Okay.
Because I've had that position a lot too.
Yeah.
But what if God chose you because he wants your grubby little hands on it? You know? Not that he wants you to sinfully look at everything, and I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I want you to look at it from the other side as well, right? God chose you to do this for what reason, right? Why isn't your husband doing this, right? Why aren't your other friends doing this? Because he's called you to do this.
Yeah.
So just like for example, your father-in-law, right? Tracy, he's the pastor at our church. So why did God call him to do that here now for this time, right? There's a reason, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be at the church if he wasn't the one preaching, right? Because I understand his heart and I understand what he's doing and why he's doing it, right? If it wasn't him, then there's a lot of people that would not be there, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that would not be being impacted by what's going on there. So for you, think about the value that you have too in this, because I think that's really, really, really important. Because if I wasn't the one doing my YouTube channel, there would be someone else who may not have the same humility that you have, right? Where you're saying, I want to be very careful, which I think you should.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you should be adding as much of yourself into this because God asked you to, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think of it both those things should be fighting each other at all times.
Yeah.
Because that humility and your responsibility are both important here for sure. So
yeah, I honestly hadn't really thought about it like that. But yeah, that's true.
I think you're set up to succeed. I think there's a lot of really cool things, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, at some other time, but there's a lot of really important things that I think that God has prepared you and is preparing you to do. And this isn't like some prophetic, like, I know,
I've got a word.
I don't have a word of knowledge about this, I'm sure, but I know you and I know what you're equipped with. And I think that God has prepared you for this, for whatever reason. And whether that is to reach 100 people or 100,000 people or 100 million people, right? God's going to make a way for you to do what you need to do as long as you are following in the way that he wants you to do it,
Right.
So it'll be cool. It'll be cool to see.
Well, thank you.
We'll look back at this in the future and then we'll cut out this clip and we'll put it at some other time when you hit like 10,000, 100,000 subscribers, and
I'll have my gold balloons.
Yep. And we'll come back to this exact moment right here. Yeah.
Well, I think this is the perfect opportunity for you to shout out yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Hello, audience. I'm Brandon. Obviously, we have a channel called the Snipe That's our main channel, but we also talk a lot about the show The Chosen over on The Chosen Sleuth. And so if you hear from my channel, leave a comment down below. Make sure that this video gets a ton of engagement, like the video. And if you like this type of content with Isabella sitting down and talking to other Christians and just talking about their lives, make sure you subscribe. It's a huge, huge thing just to help out and help the channel to grow. So, yeah.
And now you know why I asked which disciple was his favorite. I was writing that down on Wednesday, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to be weird or not, but it's funny to me. So
no, it's good.
We'll run with it.
It's good. For sure.
Well, thank you everyone for listening and or watching.
Yep.
And I appreciate everyone that watches this, and I hope that it impacted people.
Amen. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for having me. Whoa. Thanks for being on. I almost copied it exactly. Thanks for having me on.
The classic human response.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.